I was lucky enough to sit down with ski improvement guru Harald Harb recently. Harald has literally done it all in the highest level in the ski industry, from successful junior racer to Canadian World Cup athlete, to coaching junior athletes and producing US Olympic gold medalists, to becoming a PSIA demo team member and best-selling author. Harald is the inventor of the primary movements teaching and alignment system and co-founder of Harb Ski Camps. This is a lengthy interview where we will uncover the influences behind what makes Harald so successful in each area. I have time-stamped this video so you can jump to what you are interested in most. You can also put in any questions below, as we're planning on doing a series of specific short Q&A sessions on all things ski improvement, from technique to equipment selection and setup and alignment, biomechanics of skiing, the mental game of skiing and racing, and anything else you want to know. The good thing is Harald has all the answers, so fire in your questions and comments below. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the man, the myth, the legend, Harald Harb. For those of you that don't know Harald Harb, Harald's an amazing maverick thinker and innovator in the ski industry, and if anyone is demonstrating their big game, it's definitely Harald Harb. Runs camps, alignment centers, and we're going to get into all of that. But I thought first, Harald, you and I obviously go back a long way, so it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking with you. But let's talk about the influences that shaped you to get you to, I guess, where you are today. So what are some of the influences that have made you so successful today?
Well, thanks, Peter. Anyways, and it's great to see you again. I know you're in Australia, and I'm here in Colorado, so we're a distance. But yeah, a lot of things have influenced me over the years. My own ski racing career, my own teaching career, my even before ski racing, and the people that I met in Canada, where I grew up, and which there's a list at arm's length, that as long as your arm, that are really well-known skiers who I was able to encounter and learn from and grow with, and then take my own ambitions to what levels I wanted in the competitive skiing.
So let's start there, because I mean, essentially, I think you described yourself as a ski brat or a ski rat or something, like growing up. So how did you end up in Eastern Canada, and what were some of those influences?
Yeah, I'm Austrian. I was born near Innsbruck, a town called Schwaz, which was at one time the capital of Tyrol, which is the province that I'm from. And my dad was a mountaineer, climber, skier, a pioneer actually skiing. He had his Tyrolean certification in ski instruction from St. Anton with Hannes Schneider, who was a legend in his own right. And the Austrian certification came later, because the Tyroleans had one before the Austrians. Actually, the national certification was not yet in place. And then he has his own history that's pretty intriguing, because he fought against the Nazis with a commando group from South Africa, and was running from the Nazis during the war. And after the war, things got pretty tight financially in Austria, and jobs were scarce, housing was scarce. So he decided to emigrate to North America, because he had spent a good part of his war years in the United States when he finally encountered the American troops, and they brought him back to the States. So, and he liked it. He liked the idea of North America and starting a new life. That's how we got to Quebec and Montreal, and in the Laurentians, which are the mountains that you ski at north of Montreal. And that's where I grew up, went to school, and so on and so forth. So that's how we got started in Canada. And my dad then moved up to the Laurentians and worked for a ski area as a ski school director and also ski area manager. So I've been in the ski industry or at some portion of the ski industry in the winter months since I was a young boy.
And then that progressed into, so were you self-taught in a sense? Or how did you, like, let's talk about your skiing progression because it's cool. How did that sort of come about? And yeah, what were the influences there and how did you figure out how to ski?
Well, my dad was the biggest influence early on. He was, since he was Austrian certified, he had the latest information from, the gurus from St. Anton and so on. And at that point, when Hannes Schneider first started his ski schools in St. Anton, they were using a sort of a rotation technique, full body swing and follow the skis with your chest and shoulders. And just before my dad left Austria to come to Canada, they implemented the reverse shoulder technique, which is counteracting with your
Hmm.
shoulders. And that was the modern technique at the time. And I can still remember at 8 years old when my dad was showing me the reverse shoulder. And so that was and that was reverse shoulder with a stem and so on and so forth. And uh, I remember learning that. And that was the first real technical thing that I can remember implementing. But every there were very few parallel skiers in those days. This is 1956, 1957, 58. And if you parallel skied, you were one of the best skiers in Canada, just being
Right.
a parallel skier. And my dad was one of the best skiers in Canada at the time, and he skied with Ernie McCullough, who is a legend at Mont Tremblant. He was ski school director, also, an international ski racer. And he had his own system that he evolved, and it became the Canadian ski technique. So Ernie McCullough was
Right.
kind of the founder of Canadian.
How'd how'd you progress from there into racing?
Well, so your ambition as a kid, at least for me, was to ski parallel.
Right.
And
Yeah.
my dad entered me in some early races as an 8-year-old, and I won my first two races, and so that was kind of encouraging as a kid. And but I always wanted to be a skier. So I remember even at 6, 7 years old, we just couldn't wait to get on snow, and we skied weekends and holidays. So it wasn't like you were today's kids who can go to an academy or can go, ski every day while they're going to school. We did cross country after school in high school, and I went through that whole thing in high school, and didn't start actually officially racing until I was 16. And I had already taught skiing at a ski school uh, prior to that, and so I
Right.
had teaching background. I had accomplished parallel skiing at about 12 years old, between 10 and 12 years old. So there was this ambition always to be recognized as a good skier, and that's kind of what my early years did for me. I think that's what drove me on to be, known. I mean, and in school, in whether you're in mid school or high school, you always want to be identified for something, being good at something. At least I was, and skiing was my avenue to being recognized, and I think that had it was a big motivator to keep going, and I enjoy it. Obviously, we love skiing, so that didn't hurt. And winter months in Quebec were cold and long, and so skiing was the outlet.
Yeah. And it went pretty well for you, didn't it?
Well, early on, the
Quite
first
rapidly.
yeah, early on at 16, I only raced 3 or 4 races that year, and the real change came the next year when I started placing top 10 in Quebec championship type races. And then I went out west on my own when I was 18 to Alberta. And that was a big breakthrough for me. Uh, I won medals at the junior nationals. Won the first run slalom at junior nationals. So I was one of the best skiers, junior skiers in Canada at the time. So, and that gave me an opportunity to get recognized by the ski team, Canadian ski team, and I was invited to race World Cups at 18, which
Yeah.
seems kind of premature at this point when I look back at it. But I hardly had any racing experience. Even I was racing World Cups in 2 years.
So, like, how many races do you reckon you had under your belt before you were racing World Cup?
I can't even. I probably 12 or 15 races, and maybe 4 FIS races.
Right. And
Yeah.
and so all of a sudden you find yourself on the World Cup. How was that whole experience?
Well, it was a great experience. I mean, I was starting in the 50s, and I kind of didn't move backwards,
Right.
And that was Jean-Claude Killy's last race, and Nancy Green, who was the Canadian World Cup winner and gold medalist, was there, and there was that era of French dominance when they had an amazing team, uh, Auger and Perriat and Bozon and Duvillard, and you could go on and on. Pence and Roussel, so I was really focused on the French guys because they were cool. They had cool skis and they had great skis. They had the VR17 Dynamiques, and we were just trying to catch up with those guys. And Lang boots came out, and they were the first plastic boots, and the first national team that used Lang boots exclusively almost through the whole team was the Canadian ski team, the first ski team on the international circuit. So I was introduced from skiing leather boots at 18 to Lang plastic in a year and a half to 2 years. So that was a technical innovation that really made a huge difference for everybody.
Yeah, right. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. So before the Lang boots came out, what were you racing on?
The best boots were the Trapper Elite Pros, which was a French leather boot that had fiberglass reinforcement in between the leather layers.
Right.
But they barely came up as high as your ankles. So you
Yeah,
really
right.
were using ankles and feet to ski with. And, my dad, one of the things he reinforced in us all the time was you ski with your ankles and your feet. There was very little mention of, big angles with your upper body, or
Well,
the only thing with your
yeah.
upper body that was mentioned at all was sort of either you rotated or didn't rotate. So coaching was pretty rudimentary at that point.
Yeah, right. So and so when you're on the like obviously now when you're on the World Cup team, you got a mindset coach, you've got a strength and conditioning coach, you've got a dietitian, you've got rest and recovery, you've got, hot and cold bars and all the rest of it. So what did you have back then?
we it was really, and when I did actually make the official team, we I hadn't been able to ski in the summertime until I was invited to go to Europe uh, with the Quebec team. So I was on the Alberta ski team first, and then coming home from Alberta, I finished my last year of school because when I went out there, I hadn't graduated yet. Uh, I came back to school and raced out of high school, and still held my FIS points and my ranking. So the year after, I was invited to try out for the ski team and made the ski team. And at that point, I was on what they called the development team, or espoirs. That's French for hopefuls. And then with the first few FIS races, I qualified for the B team. We got reselected and were able to follow a tour that was very much like the NORAM circuit before the year before the NORAM circuit actually started. So that was kind of like the
Right.
B team effort. The year after that, we went to Europe early on in the season, and we started training and teeing, and we had summer training for a week or two with the team here and there, with the camps. But we weren't very formal as far as monitoring your progress and things like that. You showed up the way you showed up, and we didn't have video. I mean, I think I didn't see myself ski on video until years later.
Right.
Uh,
So
you
no,
know,
so no video review, no. So just really just figuring it out through feels and what and time. Like how many
some
timed runs did you get access to in training?
some timed runs, yes. We
Right.
did that. And you had to figure it out kind of on your own.
Right.
It's survival. It was really, you ran gates and you survived, and the coaches, when they weren't timing, were trying to give you some line information, very little technical, very almost no technical information whatsoever.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
even to the point where stand on one ski or two skis or whatever was very, very little discussion on any level.
Right.
I think the best coaching that I received was basically encouragement. Yeah, you're skiing well.
Right.
And then you hear that and you keep going, and you do what you think is right.
Yeah.
A strange thing did happen years later, uh, when I started recognizing what I was doing in skiing differently from the rest of the team members. And I was skiing a rounder line that was more like a carving line, as opposed to a straight at the gate and slamming the edges on.
Hmm. Is this in
And
slalom
that had
still?
Yes, in
Yeah.
slalom.
Yeah.
And that hadn't really been recognized as a technique by the coaches yet. And I hadn't recognized it as a technique. I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just doing what came to me. And the coaches would say, well, watch, like they used Paul Carson as a teammate of mine as a model. And they said, see how Paul is going straight at the gates? You're going around her. But in most races, I was either tied or beating Paul. So in slalom, so it was, I didn't really I didn't want to ski like Paul. He skied more two-footed, wider stance than I did. And so I stayed on my own course, basically. And years later, when I started to recognize what they were trying to tell me to do based on what I was doing and trying to get me out of what I was doing, which didn't make sense because I was, one of the fastest slalom skiers at that time. But they only saw one path, so you can't blame the coaches. They just don't saw what the other guys were doing, and they didn't understand what I was doing,
Yeah. They're
and I
sticking to their
didn't.
comfort zone, which is
Yeah,
what they know.
I didn't know what
And
I was doing either. I was just doing what I was doing, and so yeah, it was an interesting phenomenon that I only recognized when I started coaching, and I started to remember what they were trying to get me to do or undo from what I was doing, which is strange because it interfered with my own process of evolving.
yeah. And because when you were young, you like because we've hung out a lot, right? And you used to mention that you just hated the ski chattering. Like
Yeah, yeah. There
you
were
just
two things I
hated
hated.
it. Yeah.
I had two things in my head, even as a 14, 13-year-old. I hated when the skis moved away from me underneath me.
Yeah.
I just had this
Yeah.
sense that that the skis moving away from my center,
Hmm.
over my hips,
Yeah.
moving to the side. I always knew that the ski had to be on edge and my body had to move inside the turn, as opposed
Right.
to my skis moving out, ending up on the inside of the turn based on the skis moving away from you.
Yeah.
And the other thing I really hated was the feeling that once you did get an edge or an angle to the snow, that the skis bounced or as you said, chattered.
Right.
It just felt slow. It felt
That's
uneven. It felt,
uncomfortable. anyway.
Yeah, it felt disruptive, you know.
Yeah. And do you think because you were skiing on the eastern side of Canada that the feedback there was even stronger because of the icier conditions?
Yeah, I think that skiing on ice gives you your better intro to how to get an edge, and then if you move to softer snow after that, you get a feel or a touch for the snow. And I was equally good in ruts as I was on ice. So yeah, sometimes even better in ruts. So I developed a feel for the absorption, and that's where I think my background for not using an extension move in my teaching system that I developed. We don't use an extension move because that's a concentric contraction, and you don't want to use a concentric contraction against snow because that means you're hitting harder and digging your edges in more instead of carving. And if you use eccentric movements, and therefore you're much smoother and much more, you have much more, as the French call it, glissade or glissement, which is gliding as opposed
Right.
to being
Yes.
abrupt and harsh on the snow.
Got it. And so would you characterize like your time on the World Cup was you were just doing your own thing, but within the team because that's just how it was set up that way, in a sense. So you were making these discoveries on different all sorts of different levels that you may or may not have even realized, even at the unconscious level, and you were just and this was just setting you up for future success.
Yeah, it was basically we were all pretty much self-taught, and the guys who had a feel and were aggressive. You had to be aggressive. You had to attack everything, and because the attacking gave you the opportunity to make mistakes, and then you learn from your mistakes, and you refine those mistakes, whether you altered your line or you got on the one ski sooner, or you tipped your free foot sooner. But these are all the things that created the foundation for my understanding of technique, and then my coaching career, of course, just amplified that.
Yeah, really, yeah, really interesting. So what do you think would have been s- some of the biggest takeaways from being on the World Cup? Not
Well,
necessarily just skiing, but across the board, that it sort of
yeah,
helped set you up.
watching, watching and talking to the best skiers in the world,
Right,
and I was lucky. I had language skills. I could speak French fluently, and I speak German fluently. So I could hang with the French guys. I could hang with the Austrians and the Swiss, uh, and I did a lot. And I learned from them, and I watched them closely. I can remember this was an anecdote at the World Cup finals, hiking the course in 1971, and Gustavo Tuni and Karel Schranz were standing sort of on either side of the slalom course, and I'm hiking up there beside them, and I hear them speaking English to each other because that was the way they communicated. And Karl Schwanz was teasing Gustavo Toni about, well, this is a slalom, and you're a slalom specialist, but if I win the slalom, I win the overall. And they were bantering back and forth about who, because that was really the deciding race for who was going to win the overall. So it was interesting to be on the hill, just listening to how those guys talk to each other.
yeah, right. Hey, you also mentioned that like you figured things out by going sort of attack mode, like
Yeah,
when you were racing. Were they breakaway gates by then, or was it
no,
bamboo?
no. Yeah, there was plastic at this time. We
Right,
we we were mostly using bamboo, and then they used tubular plastic.
right.
There was one year where we had three colors in those days. We had blue, red, and yellow also.
Okay.
So there were three gate colors. And at one point they had these shapes on top in foam that they actually either taped or laminated to the color. So they
Right.
had a triangle, they had a ball, and I forgot what they had for yellow.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so it was a fascinating. You could hit the plastic and it would bend, whereas
Right. The
whereas
bamboo would
the bamboo would
just pull
break,
out.
and
Yeah.
but we weren't, even the best guys. I mean, they break a lot of especially people like Auger and Tyler Palmer would break bamboo because they got, once the plastic boots came out, you could, the word was shin to wind,
Right.
and you the guys were getting close enough to start knocking and breaking bamboo at
Yeah.
the knee level.
Yeah. And
So yeah, we were starting to see plastic, but no breakaways. They were solid plastic that was stuck in the ground.
okay. And shin guards?
No, no, a lot of sore shins.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So
And
you blocked the gate out with your arm, with your forearm,
right.
with your
Padded
inside
padded
forearm.
jumper? Would you have a padded some sort of padding on the jumper maybe?
Yeah, on the
Yeah.
sweaters
Yeah.
they had foam or rubber
Yeah.
sewn in. Yes,
Yeah.
and then on the pants to some extent the last year. Yes.
Okay. But overall, yeah, nothing like what they're wearing today. Well,
No,
and
we weren't
and
using helmets or anything. No head protection whatsoever. Goggles were the only thing used.
yeah,
Nobody
and
used helmets in GS even.
no, that's when yeah, even when I started ski racing, it wasn't even mandatory. um, um, so I, y- so so you took that and your racing experience and the things that you've kind of figured out, and then when you decided that you'd had what was the decision that to sort of move out of World Cup racing and then head into coaching?
Perfect. Yeah. I it was, financially it was really tough because there was no
No,
prize money. There was no.
no
There
Instagram,
was
no Facebook,
The
no.
contracts were so small that
Right.
I had a contract with skis and boots, but it wasn't enough to keep you going, and so uh, I went pro racing to the U.S. At 21, I retired from the
Okay,
Canadian
so
team.
so just for the listeners who might have missed this, so at 18 you're on the World Cup, and then at 21 you're like, I'm over it just because there wasn't the real, you couldn't make it work with the
Yeah,
financial side of things.
yeah. I was working all summer on construction. I was building chairlifts for Poma Lift, and so that was my background in the lift building business. Um, and I moved to Vermont to Stratton because they had a pro team at the ski area through the ski school. And Amo Henrik, who was the ski school director, had Hias Leitner and uh, Ernst Hinterseer, and those guys were the pro team in early pro racing. And at that time, just when I moved there, Herman Gollner, who had pro raced also with those guys, uh, was hired as the head coach and director of the school at Stratton, and was one of the first ski academies. And so I went there to pro race for the ski school and coach racers through the ski school program, and won the overall Eastern pro racing championship, which was reasonably good money at that time. And I had a full time job at the ski school as well, so that was a good way to get started. And then when the academy got established, Herman Gollner uh, came to me and asked me if I would work as a coach, and that's when my coaching career started at 23 years old. And it was really a fast progression in the ski coaching world. I was the head coach of the Eastern Division to the Nationals my first year of coaching, where that's sort of unheard of because there are all these other programs and coaches have been coaching a long time. But with my background and experience as a racer, that was probably beyond what most of the coaches were had as backgrounds at that time.
And given that you'd sort of you'd all of you guys were sort of figuring out yourselves in a sense and taking and sharing, you know, sharing knowledge with the other competitors. So once you started coaching, did how did you go about instilling what you'd figured out into the athletes that you're working for?
Well, it's it it's an amazing opportunity to see development kids when you aren't really that far away from being a development kid yourself. And I thought I was going to be a different kind of coach than what I had experienced as an athlete. I wanted to be way more helpful. I wanted to be more input, giving kids input about how and what, and using my own experience, the successful moves, and uh, I was able to convey that and evolve it and figure out from what worked for me. And Herman Gollner was very much on the same lines as my dad. He's Austrian, and he was talking about you use your ankles in your ski boots against the wall of the ski boot, and you keep your inside foot lighter than your outside foot. And he had no problem with narrower stance, and because the Austrian racers were, a lot of them were skiing with a very narrow stance very successfully and winning, and there was no taboo about skiing narrow at all. The best skiers in the world were skiing narrow, as Auger and those guys were all with their feet, and Bacletta. So when you ask me about influences, yeah, I got to train with Auger. I got to train with Bacletta. Andrzej Bacletta is a Polish skier who was, won a World Cup and was top 3 or top 5 most of his career in the World Cup. And I got to ski with those guys, on the same course, just them and me. And I could follow behind them and watch them, and using my own evolution, my own technique. That's how I, and supported by Herman as the head coach, that's how I developed my coaching. And then when you watch the kids, it's so basically pretty crude technique, when they're 12, 13, 14, 15. So it's not hard to pick out issues that they might have. If you're leaning on your inside foot, you're not getting all your grip on your outside ski, so it's pretty basic. Get off your inside ski and find out how to balance, and it really boils down to balancing on the outside ski, and it still does today.
Yeah, and you said one to me once when we were training. We're jumping forward, but we'll stay on this track. That when you're watching it, like a skier come down, you're also running a video on the other half, right?
Yeah.
And then were you doing that back then with the kids, or can you explain that how you go about doing that? Because yeah, it's quite a
Okay, hang on
challenge.
just a second. I'm gonna turn a light on here.
Yeah.
It was getting a little
Oh, there
dark
we
there.
go.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
better.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I had I discovered over the years that visually I had this ability to see the intricacies, even the minute things. And I also had a visual ability to put like a video plan in the back of my head when I was watching skiers, and I could almost like mentally superimpose their movements over what a world-class skier would be doing.
Right.
And so, and I
Okay.
could play that constantly when I was watching, and it really made it made it very easy to identify the mistakes. But then you have to understand that you're going to see more than one mistake in most cases, and you've got to pick the
The single
SMIM,
most
which we
Yeah,
developed
single most
through
important
PMTS,
movement.
right?
Yeah.
What's the single most important movement to address because you
Yeah.
could fire a lot of information out there
Yeah.
and confuse the athletes. So you really have to boil
Yeah.
it down to a very important single one aspect that they're missing
Yeah.
and focus on that before you start elaborating and getting too complex with all these things. And then you can build on that. You start with one thing and then you see it happening and you reinforce it and then you build
Yeah.
on top of it. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Well,
even back in when I was at 23 or 24 as a new coach, um, that was the foundation for the programs and ski development techniques that my system has now built into it.
right. And that was one of the best things you ever taught me, because I came from learning traditional ski instruction coaching. And then when I learned the single most important movement, my clients loved me from then on, because they'd be like, you could just, and once they build that, they gain that bit of confidence, and then you can see how it sits in the overall, and you move from there. And especially with my mind being really creative, right? I can go in lots of different areas. So it was brilliant advice for me as a young ski coach to be taught how to do that, and then you just see the results, and there's no other way around doing it. And yeah, and most of the time you're just holding stuff back, aren't you? Because you're just letting them get to that level, and then you're ready to let them kind of discover the next piece.
Well, I think that for a coach who really understands or has a good grasp of ski technique, the most difficult part of coaching is keeping it inside all the things you see,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you can easily get
yeah,
overworked with the kid, over information,
yeah,
loading, and that really can, when you're working with the same kids day after day, you build on their understanding as you coach them. You're coaching them about skiing, not just their own skiing, but about what they need to have logged in as a go for things to go to when and those things have to be very clearly understood with one word cues for themselves so that they don't get into a lot of trying to think it through, because you can't be thinking that much. You've got to have immediate response. So the one word cues that create a movement is what I try to instill in the kids when they were skiing. And like, if you're skiing down the hill, the other thing that we worked on a lot is you have to start to sense your slight deviation from ideal balance early on, before it becomes a big problem in the course or in a free ski room. Because the sooner you identify that there's one part of your balancing formula that you're losing, you've got to correct it right away before it gets too big, because then it's a bigger mistake and then it takes a longer and more difficult to clear up. And I do that with our students even today. Uh, you know, and this is jumping ahead a lot, but you know, PMTS is 5 essentials, as you know from the essentials book, and those are the 5. If you have those 5, you don't need anything else. And if you have a one word cue and you can identify which one's going astray, you can pin that one down right away and have a fix for it, because we have the fixes built into the system. So even though I wasn't as refined as impossible to be as nowadays, uh, at that early age, I was starting to do some of the things we've, putting in place in our system in my books and videos
yeah.
that I've produced.
And so from Stratton, what was the next stage? How'd you end up in Alyeska? Is that sort of the next stage of the career, or is there
Well,
something in between?
I'll jump through a couple of real quick things.
Yeah,
Uh, at Stratton, I became the head coach of the FIS group, and which is the top group, and we had a number of national team kids. We were evolving, we were bringing kids to the national team all the time. And at one junior nationals, the year before I left Stratton, we won every event at the junior nationals, and we had 5. I had 5 of my boys in the top 10 at the junior nationals and first and second, and three others in the top 10. And no other program was even close to doing that. So we dominated, and we did it in the women as well. So so we had a dominant team. We had huge success with our kids, and so then I took a job as head coach in Mount Washington Valley in New Hampshire, and where there was it was a local, more of a local club program, and I evolved it into having a full-time school with an academy, and joined three of the ski areas together to form Mount Washington Valley program, and then we evolved other national team members out of there, and that was in North Conway, New Hampshire, and Mount Washington Valley, a beautiful area and great skiing there. And then I was offered a couple of jobs with the U.S. ski team, and I was also director of development camp at Squaw Valley for the U.S. ski team. So I had a lot of interaction with the U.S. ski team at that time as well, when Sean Harald was the head coach. And so without going to the ski team, I was offered a job in Alaska because I'd been going up there and running their summer camps in June. And when I was up there in 1996, 95, 96, they asked me if I would recommend a coach for their academy they had started at Alyeska, which was a school for ski racing like other academies. And at the end of the camp, I gave them some names, and they said, "Well, we don't want any of these names. We're going to offer you the job." So I thought, this is great. What an opportunity to move to Alaska, and that doesn't come along every day. And I loved it up there, and even my summer experiences there for the camps, I really enjoyed the town of Girdwood and the people that I'd met there. So I took the job and was there for 7 years.
Okay, and in that time, what were some of the results you were getting?
Well, I was lucky to see the talent when I was coaching the summer camps. I saw these
Right,
kids at 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old.
right,
And that was one of the reasons I went and took the job,
right.
because I knew that the talent that was coming up through the program there. And Tommy Moe was 14 years old, and I was coaching him at summer camps. Hillary Lind was 13 years old. She's a world champion. Tommy Moe's a gold medalist and a silver medalist. And then Mike Makar was 9 or 10 years old. He was world junior champion. And then we had 6 other national team members coming out of the program in the years when I was there and after I left. So we had huge success, and there was no program in the country that was putting out that kind of talent at that time for the U.S. ski team. And we had no other program put 2 kids to Topolino, which Topolino is under 14 world championships basically in Italy. So, it was such an exciting time for me, having that kind of talent. I had a great coaching staff. I hired a guy, Scott Young, who was women's coach at Middlebury, and Mark Ide, who was also had some World Cup starts in downhill, and Darcy Byrne, who was a top 10 at the nationals and was a UAA college racer. Her sister was on the national demo team later on, and when I made the national PSIA demo
Okay,
team,
we're
I
getting to that.
skied with my own coach's sister, who was on the team at the same time.
Right.
So yeah, it was just skiing is such a great sport that way. It's such a small world,
Yeah.
and you just have all these connections.
So let's talk about fear a little bit, because you're one of the most fearless skiers I've ever met, right? And whereas I'm just on the other, like, we're on the scale. You told me a story that you used to do, like, to warm up or at the end of the day at Alyeska with Tommy Moe, where you had to take that straight shot through the rocks things and just
Oh
launch.
yeah, yeah. We love to go back. extreme skiing, even though extreme skiing wasn't that big a thing as it is now.
Right.
We used to hike up and go up above the avalanche zones, and there were all these chutes and ridges on Max's Mountain, and we used to do a high traverse and cut in, and you used to have to kind of these these ravines. There were these chutes and ravines, and to get to one from one to the other, you had to get over the hump, so to speak, that ran all the way down from top to bottom. And they were usually, the wind was blown off, and they were pure ice and rocks in between. So you had to, you're way up and you're scaling over, and there's only this much of your ski basically that is touching the ice, and you know, it's 45, 50 degrees of steep. And from there, you had to jump into the chute that had probably not been skied all winter. So you didn't know what you were running into at that point. But those were some of the things we used to do after training, and just to keep yourself sharp, you know. But Alyeska is such an amazing mountain. If you ski there for a year or two and you ski every day, you almost become invincible. You think you're invincible because you ski such difficult stuff. And if you have no fear and you're ready to ski steeps, it's amazing how good you can get with just the skiing is natural training there for your own skiing.
Right. So when you say it's difficult, is it difficult terrain, snow conditions, or a combination of all of them?
It's everything. There are
Right.
days when you have pure ice because it rains and
Right.
freezes, and then you'll
Okay.
have a foot or two of heavy wet. I mean, at
Right.
first it's powder for the first hour, and then it turns into this heavy wet stuff,
Yeah.
and then you're seeing, you know, the 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 south face, which is 50 degrees the whole way down, and you're learning how to ski in 2 feet of heavy mush at 50 degrees, and you have
Right.
to learn how to control speed and make turns the whole way down. It's a school by itself. That mountain is the best school you can have.
You often like to use the terrain to school the student, because when Marty, Scotty, and I would be training with you, we'd be at the end of the day, and all of a sudden we'd be looking up and we'd be on the steepest, gnarliest, bloody chicken-headed, frozen, bumpiest thing, and then you'd ski down it like it was nothing. Scotty'd have a crack, Marty'd move off to the easier line, and I would just bail out the back and kind of meet you at the bottom of the hill. Is that one of the ways that you like to push your students? Because I never got that at the time. I'm like, "Oh, I just never look forward to the end of the day."
You know, with athletes, yeah, I always took them out skiing. I skied with the athletes all the time. I
Right,
always had my regular ski boots on. I never put hiking boots or, you know, coaching boots
right.
on.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Ever. I never
Yeah,
did that because that I wanted the athletes to recognize that I could still ski,
yeah,
and I could take them skiing and still
yeah,
challenge them.
right.
And it brings, you know, a rapport that to with the athletes that you
Yeah.
get.
Well, you're not
The
just a coach, you're also a mentor in that sense
Yeah,
because
you're
they
not just
can
a stand
watch
on the
you.
hill kind of beside the course type of guy. You're out there with
Yeah,
them, skiing with them, and
yeah,
demonstrating for them even.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
that's right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
no, and with I don't do that with my clients unless it's an extreme camp and they've shown me what they can do at a
that's
certain
right. Well, we
level.
we were doing race camps, right? So you were
Yeah,
push like, we were there to be pushed. I
right.
just wouldn't take the bait, but, um, uh but then, what you say, like what you say, for the people watching and listening is because I would come and we'll get into this more, but I would come and stay with you early season, and like I moved in. I'm the kind of guy that when he finds a guru, he's just going to pick his brains forever. So I think for 4 or 5 seasons there, I would move into your place early season and post season. And I would see you skiing early season, and I'd be working on my skiing, and then you used to come up and train our team up in Fernie, and like so I would have been working on my skiing all season, and then you arrive, and I would look at two turns, and I just go, oh, I've got to lift my game like straight away, like every year. And I'm not just blowing smoke. I would go like I'd be thinking, "Geez, I'm doing pretty well. I'm looking forward to Harold," and then I'd watch you come down, and I'm like, "Just got to lift my game." Like, so in terms of skiing, I get the value of you actually being on snow because it elevates you. It just reset my goals every time.
Yeah, that's, uh, the years after, well, being in Alaska and getting so much mileage there, even though I was coaching full time, I just was able to ski with the US PSIA demo team because they used to come up and do clinics there for the ski instructors, and they would invite me to ski with them. So uh, I saw how they skied and um, and was able to ski with them and kind of do what you were saying too with them, challenge them a little bit, and and then as a result, as the story develops, the ski instructors at Alyeska said, "You should try out for the demo team because we see you ski and we see them ski, and we know your information, and we've never seen the kids up here ski as well as when you started coaching them." They wanted to know what I was doing because they wanted to be able to ski that way, just like what you just said. When I came, you said, "Well, I want to raise my game like that." Yeah, and that's what the ski school guys at Alyeska were doing with me, and I was coaching them at night, after training. And then they said, you should get your certification and all that. And because I was a master coach in USSA coaching at the highest level, in US ski team coaching, but I had not achieved any PSIA or instructor certifications.
Well,
So I did that.
you didn't really have anything to do with, like, in because there's ski coaching, so racing and coaching, which is your background, and then there's the ski school of instructing, and you really didn't have a whole lot to do with it up until what we're getting up to.
Yeah, I had taught skiing before, and I had taught skiing a little bit at Stratton and a little bit in my teen years at some of the ski areas in Quebec to make a little money on the side, which was basically
Right.
illegal at the time because you weren't supposed to be paid to be a skier if you were an amateur racer.
Right, okay.
But nobody said anything at the time.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah. So what happened was the instructors finally convinced me that I should go to this tryout for the national team,
Yeah.
and at first I said, no, I can't do that. I got a full time job, and they said, well, it's at the end of your season, and we'll pay your way and do the whole thing at Snowbird,
Yeah.
and I was lucky to be at Alyeska to go there because Alyeska is as I was saying earlier, the best teacher. Makes you so tough
Mhm.
skiing, tough terrain and tough slopes.
Yeah.
So when I went to the tryouts at Snowbird, most people go to Snowbird and they're intimidated. I wasn't intimidated at all. I was skiing harder stuff than Snowbird. I mean, Snowbird has some steep, tough terrain. There's no
Yeah.
doubt. But if
Yeah.
you're skiing at Alyeska, you're conditioned for it. You're ready.
Right.
So
You're basically in perfect peak form to hit
yeah,
Snowbird.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was 42 years old at the time. I was the oldest guy there. All
Right.
these other guys were in their 20s pretty much.
Yeah.
And even the
And
previous team members.
because there's we've talked through this at length, right? But so there's 2 or 3 days of just celebration of skiing and then the tryouts. Can you take us through how that all played out and what people were saying after day 1?
Yeah, that it's a format where you have from each division in the U.S. they have I don't about five candidates from each division. So there's about 50 tryout people, and the previous team members who want to retry will do that. And the first 2 days are you're all put in different groups with examiners and things, and and they video the runs and so on. And they make you do certain forms and make you ski certain terrain. And then out of the first 2 days, they cut it down to about half of that. And then they do another 2 days, and then they cut it down to 15. And at the time I was doing it, there were 10 members. And that was the most intense. The last 15 2 days was the most intense skiing, and you had to teach as well. They were all the team member. I already knew most of the team members, and they'd already assigned me to ski in the academy before the tryouts with Victor Gurdon, who was doing fundamental forms. So they said, Harold, you got to do that, because if you're going to teach our system in the tryouts, you got to know what you're doing. So I spent 2 days with Victor. He was great. He taught me
Right.
how to do a wedge Christie.
Right. Yeah, because it's not really in your wheelhouse, which we'll get
Well,
to.
it wasn't too tough to learn how to do a wedge Christie.
Yeah. When you
Yeah.
apply, what
So
you know.
so
Yeah.
I did that with Victor, and I went through the agony of step-by-step stuff, and that was very helpful for when I had to teach. But
Right.
we had, we there was a run that was about 1,000 feet of vertical, and it was all bumped. It was 45 degrees steep,
Right.
and I was on 207 K2s,
Yeah.
and the bumps were really narrow and close together, and you could not make an error in that whole run. I think those 2 runs, we had 2 runs on that slope. I think of all the runs, I think that those were some of the defining things that made the selection.
Right.
So the long and the short of that is I made the national team in the U.S. for
Yeah.
the PSIA, which I don't think to this day there's anyone else who's been on 2 national teams from different countries.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So essentially, you're a master coach in the coaching space. You're helping out the local instructors by coaching them at night, because they're actually seeing what results you are generating with your kids, right? Your junior program. So you're helping them, and they go, Harold, we think you should go and try out for this ski instructing side of things, the best ski instructors in the country. And they go, we'll pay for it to go do it. So then you do it, you show up, you make the team. Does the team know what they're in for?
Um, well, they were kind of saying that it would be good to have somebody with a high level coaching background and racing background on the team,
Right.
because they hadn't had that before.
Okay.
And but they didn't realize that I wasn't going to coach what they were teaching.
Yeah.
That's where the whole thing went sour, or
Mhm.
in different directions.
Yeah.
Uh, I'd been coaching athletes that were better skiers than the demo team for most of my career.
Right.
So, what? First of all, I came on and watching the demo team guys, I was trying to help them with their skiing, because
Back in the
it
day.
was
Yeah.
pretty obvious to me what was going on.
Right.
But they had reached a level where they weren't hearing improvements. They weren't really interested in changing their skiing.
So they had
Uh,
their own sort of comfort zone, and they were,
yeah,
yeah, and they weren't
right,
really interested in going
yeah,
outside of that. Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I didn't pursue that very long.
Yeah.
Figured that one
Yeah.
out.
So
But
you're suggesting things, and there's crickets in the background.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then I was when I, as a demo team member, you travel around the country, and
Yeah.
you coach examiners and trainers from other divisions, and instructors as well.
Yeah.
And I was pretty evolving at the same time. I was evolving a lot of the alignment and boot work that we were doing.
Mhm.
And when I was traveling, everybody wanted to know about what to do with their boots, and that was a big deal. And I was giving clinics on boot work as well as
Right.
doing the actual coaching.
Yeah.
And I had at that time I had started the first alignment center at Winter Park,
Yeah,
and
right.
where skiers could come in and ski with me, and then get their boots aligned and footbeds made, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
this was going on at the same time, and
In parallel, yeah.
yeah,
Because once you made the demo team, your phone didn't stop ringing for job offers.
that's right. I was uh, made a tour where I was interviewing for jobs at Aspen and Vale and Winter Park and
Yeah.
and I chose Winter Park because of of the manager of the ski school, Jerry Muth. He had a MBA and he'd been the GM at Sugarloaf Mountain, and he was the guy I wanted to learn the business from because I'd run race camps and run World Junior races, big events, and those are there was a lot of organization and a lot of volunteer work involved and a lot of technical stuff and having the right people in the right place at race like a FIS World Championships. So I knew how to do that kind of work, but I hadn't been involved directly in the ski school business and how to run a ski school. So that's why I went to Winter Park. And the main reason also was that Jerry was Muth was going to let me do exactly what I wanted to do there, which was I basically ran the training team, and I evolved the technical parts of what we taught, and I was training the whole ski school, and we basically directed it towards PMTS, and that's where
Yeah.
PMTS started.
That's really where you started to birth. And so for the listeners that I'll just fill in some of the gaps. So basically, when you said you started to work on alignment and things like that, with your athletes, you they would go off and get new boots, and sometimes they'd be faster and sometimes they'd be slower. And so
Yeah.
you started to unpack all of that. Can you just sort of talk talk the listeners through or the viewers through?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I needed empirical data. I needed proof of what I was doing, so I was doing time trials almost all the time, and I would do every run. I would take times down, and then I would start tweaking boots, and I would be looking at the times. And I've seen improvements on a 40-second course of a second and a half with athletes where I just changed the alignment on the underneath the boot sole, right on the mountain. I evolved little shims and wedges that you could put in, temporary stuff that you could put in very quickly for one run and test it. And I found huge success with athletes. Uh, I basically some of the athletes I put on the national ski team was based on the changes that I made in their boots.
right. So so for those people that aren't watching, essentially skiers come in all shapes and sizes, essentially, but riding a flat ski is is the holy grail of skiing. But if you're tipped in, if you're high, if you're knock-kneed or if you're bow-legged, or if one's flat and one's off, uh, you developed a program that would identify this and sort that out, so as everyone had a kind of a level playing field, and then it was up to the athlete to perform.
Yeah, and it became very almost polarized because the ski boot companies didn't really want to join in, and and I was adamant about how important this was. And I even presented at the Interski in Japan a video. I produced a video on a big screen with everybody from every nation who was at Winters at Interski was there to watch it, and I had aligned myself knock-kneed. I'd aligned myself bow-legged, and I aligned myself flat, and uh, I could see the difference. But it's amazing. Ski the instructors, most of them didn't see the difference. And that's really opened my eyes to why they're not that precise about what they teach in movements because they don't see those things.
Right. Whereas you've come from a racing background, and with your visual ability to look at absolutely every the finest detail and work out, you kind of over time you brought it down to, oh, it's the relationship between the boot and the ski and the ski and the snow, that once
Yes.
that's optimized, then athletes that were doing all these maybe compensatory movements are suddenly free to do, I guess, your essential movements that we'll get into. Um, uh, so yeah, so Winter Park was sort of the start of the Harb Ski Camp business and program and systems, I guess, where you're not just. So tell us about some of the results you were getting with the ski instructors at Winter Park who had failed 2 and 3 times getting their certifications once they
Yeah,
were aligned.
that started at Winter Park and then carried on
Yeah,
to after we even started our camps. We would get ski instructors coming to our camps just so they could get through
just just
some of their certifications that they'd failed numerous times.
yeah,
So part of it was movement. Movement
okay,
and alignment go together.
yeah,
They're not separated.
yeah,
And this is where the ski industry hasn't grasped this yet. Uh, Even at the World Cup level, this is getting to be a long discussion. Now
yep,
we're opening a
yep,
whole new can of worms. So,
yep. That's all right, we'll just
but
roll with it.
because the boot techs on the World Cup that work for the ski boot companies, they do a basic fitting and maybe mess around with the cuff a little bit or whatever, and then they give the athletes on the boots to the coaches, and the coaches don't really know what's going on with the boot guys, and the boot guys don't really know what the coaches are coaching them, and so they're not combined in their efforts. They're not cross-linking their understanding. And if you're a coach and you see mistakes from an athlete, or he's having the continuously same problem on certain gates on certain turns, the coach will say, well, you're not skiing correctly. He's not going to say, well, the boot's not right, because he doesn't know what can be done with the boots to make it right. The boot tech guy, yeah, he doesn't go out on the hill and say, oh yeah, that I see that movement's wrong. I'm going to change the boot again because of that, because the coach won't let him do it, because the coach doesn't want him interfering with what's going on the hill. So you've got this separation, and that goes on and this is crucial. It goes on in ski shops that would like to say they can do alignment and like to say they make footbeds for people and stuff. They they don't know how those people ski. They People come into the shop, the guy will make a footbed and send him on his way. The same well, even if he does shaving of the boots and puts plates on it to do the bottom alignment, like say choose the angles from his measurement indoors. We have over 20,000 people that we've measured. The data that we have, nobody else in the ski industry has the data we have. We've been doing this for 25 years, and we're collecting data and recording it and holding on to it so we can go back to it. So if you got an alignment from us 10 years ago, we know exactly what boots you were on. We know exactly what angles we put in. We know exactly what cuff changes we made. And then we ski with you. The we're the people who are doing your boot work are watching you ski, and then we can fine tune it afterwards. And at first we used to have to fine tune it more, because when we started out, now we have to hardly do any fine tuning on snow, because we have so much data backing up what we've done. We've seen so many different kinds of legs, and no two legs are the same. No two ankles function the same way. No two people pronate or supinate the same way or the same amount. And each individual has to have an individual footbed made for them, for their ability to use your ankle, use your foot. And most of the footbeds in the ski industry are basically cookie cutter type, crank them out. They're not individualized to the point where it's really necessary, because in the boot, your ankle has to be functional. That's one thing with racers that we do now. We still work with racers, a lot of racers at the national level. In fact, I've had World Cup skiers in our shop that have won races on the World Cup, and so won runs anyways. And the thing about that is that we have found so many racers who've downsized so much they've locked their feet up in their ski boots and aren't able to use their ankles and their feet properly. And once you free them up, they go, "Oh my gosh." And there's this thing in the ski biz, racing biz, that the tighter the better, which isn't always the answer. Yeah, and loose is not any good either, but you have to have some functional
Yeah.
eversion and movement so that you can put some leverage or
So you
pressure
can
on the
balance.
side of the boot.
Yeah, and so you can balance and
Yeah.
counteract and everything. So so you you hit the demo team, wound up in Winter Park where you kind of started really refining everything, and then and then Winter Park, Aspen Performance Centers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we
So you
did
went from
3 performance centers at Aspen,
right.
for a year, and then, we 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 Telluride called and said they'd like to do that also, so we did a year at Telluride, to get them started with a performance center. But then I said, I'm done doing this for other people, and that's when we started our own company with Diana. Diana Rogers is my partner, and and Diana and I then took that forward from there. Diana worked at the performance centers, and she was a trainer and also a top-notch skier and racer. And she didn't start racing till she was 30 years old, and was racing was you know beating all the masters and also all the men. She beat all the men at masters races as well as the women. And Michaela Schifrin's mother was racing then, and she was an NCAA racer out of Middlebury College, so she was a high level performer. And Diana had never raced in her life until she was 30 years old, and started beating all these people who, you know, I was coaching her and doing her alignment because she had terrible feet, terrible alignment. And so there was another occasion where the alignment and the technique really proved itself.
Yeah, and because we met at the Aspen Performance Centers,
Right.
so by the time you got to Aspen, I was there on a media trip out of Australia, and there were two choices on that day. We could go and have a look at the Victorian architecture of Aspen, which I'm sure would have been a great day, or you could go to the Aspen Ski Performance Center. And I'm like, um, my readers are going to be interested in that. Like I was interested in that, right? So then I made a beeline to that, and I skied. I didn't ski with you on that day, and I just spent like I think an hour there on a tour. But back then it was state of the art. You had a cabin halfway down the hill, or 2/3 of the way down the hill, where you would ski in, do the indoor assessment. I think you could build footbeds
Yeah. Yeah.
there.
We
Yeah,
built
yeah, you
the
could
one you
build
went to
footbeds there.
was at the Spider Savage Center
Yeah,
at Snowmass.
yeah, it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. It was at Snowmass. Yeah, and because Diana was at Buttermilk. I think she was running the
Yeah,
Buttermilk
yeah.
Center.
And
Yeah,
Dick Hauser was at Snowmass at the time, I think.
yeah. Okay, so and then and so I yeah, so I did like an hour, and he just put some temporary shims under my heels, and I was coming back from severe knee injury, so I ski coached and retired. And literally, I was going out with him, and I was skiing on some sort of shaped kind of skis, and a little bit better aligned than ever. And the first thing that went in the back of my mind went, I could start ski coaching again, because I just knew that suddenly I was on the right path. I never realized what was going to happen after that. So then I extended my trip. I was so impressed. I extended my trip for a week. I mean, I probably wanted to extend it anyway, to be honest. But then Bron and I, another ski journo, we traveled back and we did a half day. And then you came out for the last run because you heard some Aussie media people had shown up, and and then we took a run. We took one run together at the end of the day, and that was when you were skiing around on super shaped skis with no poles because you were just arcing ridiculous angles. And I'd skied and trained and sort out like the very best skiers in the world. I'd worked in Buller in Australia, which is has the best of the best Austrian guys there, and some of the best North American guys. And I was just staggered by the power you could generate out of the ski. So um, um, yeah, so that was the start of things, and just so for the listeners there, so I was really knock-kneed with my setup. So the reason why I struggled, because I used to go out with the top coaches and say, what do I do to improve? And they're like, "Oh, Stoney, you're pretty strong. Like, it's looking pretty good." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm not hooking them up like you are, right? Because I go to the best of the best in the ski school." And nobody ever said, and I'd worked in ski retail, I'd worked in boots, but no one had ever said, "Well, maybe it's your relationship between your boot and the ski, and riding a flat ski rather than being." Because I was like when I started, I was 4.5 degrees high
Oh,
side inside.
I remember
Yeah,
the work we did
and
with your boots. Yeah.
and 3 on the left. So I was like, if you put my skis, if you switched them, I couldn't even stand on the hill. Like my legs would just separate that far. Um, so yeah, so it was a revelation for me. And then we crossed paths. So then you went from the Aspen Performance Centers, which were fantastic, over to Telluride, and then we didn't touch on part of the story was you pieced together your thoughts on skiing and how to revolutionize, I guess, the ski teaching side of things, because you had kind of ski coaching covered, and that you sort of developed that whilst you're on the demo team, and then that they decided to keep going in, I guess, their direction in a sense. I'm paraphrasing, like jump in if I'm getting this wrong, but then you took that what you and turned that into your sort of first book and video. Anyone can be an expert skier.
Yeah. I had the I had the program for a parallel skier, it's and even before parallel, even if you had a wedge entry to turns, I had a program for you to get to
The
parallel
fast
very
track to
easily.
parallel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but I hadn't got it right all the way to the beginner yet. But when the shape ski came out and I started to basically PMTS is based on the way World Cup skiers ski.
Yeah.
And they use the most efficient technique because they have to. You're not going to
Yeah.
be fast unless you're using the most efficient way to get down the hill.
Yeah.
And I always was into efficiency uh, because it required less energy, required less
Hmm.
gross movement patterns.
Yeah.
You can be more refined.
Yeah.
And so I reversed engineered what the best skiers in the world were doing and my own sense of skiing, all the way down to how you would apply it to a beginner first time on snow.
Hmm.
And we called that PMTS direct to parallel. So it was
Yeah.
a direct parallel method without the wedges and wedge turns or snow plows that some people know as the beginning methods that
Hmm.
are still being taught everywhere in every ski school in every country in the world.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, the biomechanics of all of the countries in the world that teach skiing are exactly the same. And their
Right.
progressions are all exactly the same.
Yeah.
Even though the Austrians might want to say we do this and the US says we do that, or
Hmm.
the Swiss say we do this, or the Norwegians will say, or the Japanese will say we teach it this way. It's all
Hmm.
the same,
Right.
regardless of what words you want to throw at it.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, biomechanically, the way the body moves with the leverages that we have as human beings, they all teach the same system.
Right.
The only system in the world that is totally different is PMTS direct parallel,
Right.
because we don't teach any of those things that they teach.
Yeah.
So that's what happened with my first book. And my first book was published in 1997.
Yeah.
And I make a slight correction when I said I went to Alaska. It was 86, not 96. So
Oh, yeah,
if
that
you,
makes sense because I was like, yeah,
yeah,
no, yeah,
right. If
yeah,
you
yeah.
go back
Okay. Yeah,
and play it back, you'll see that I
that's
should have
fine.
said 86, not
Yeah.
96. Yeah,
And
10 years difference. But
and
anyways, yeah, that's what that's how the PMTS direct parallel evolved, and out of my first book. And I, due to the I we haven't touched on the fact that I was a technical editor for Snow Country magazine and Skiing magazine. So I was doing a lot of the articles on ski technique and alignment for those magazines. And because I did not, I said I didn't want to get paid for my articles. Just put my, and I started a website early on, one of the first ski websites, and then I started doing YouTube videos very early. And because of my camp experience with racers in Europe and everywhere, I thought, well, this is an opportunity to use my background in camps organization. And then with the internet starting up, we were able to contact and get a lot of skiers on board. And that's when Diana and I decided we're going to run it through, and we're going to run our own show, basically. And we linked up with a number of ski areas to do camps at the ski areas, and that's basically how we started the company. We didn't even have an alignment center yet, our own shop. We were, yeah, that, and end up at Sol Vista, which was that area up in Granby, where we had a little Quonset hut there, and we started out with one, and then I found a place down here near our home, and that's how we got our first shop and ski shop started.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And the rest is
as
history, as they say.
yeah. So basically, as the book took off, right, people
Yeah, it
started
was
to ring.
bestseller, sports bestseller,
Yeah,
and
and people
on
started to ring
Amazon.
and say, "Oh, where can we do this?" And you're like, "Oh, hang on, there's a camp happening next week," kind
Yeah.
of thing, and it just grew from there.
Well, right now our camps, we put them up on our website, and within 24 hours, they're all full for the whole season. And it's really hard on the people who find out about us during the season. They can't join in or didn't know about us the year before. We always tell them that get your name on a list, because we'll let you know when we put our camp slots up on our website ahead of time, so you can sign up right away, because
Yeah,
24 hours, it's like that, it's gone.
yeah. So, 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 like, so if someone turns up to a camp and yeah, they'll need to for next year's camp, they'll need to get on a wait list because it sells out. So this, but let's. So what are they in for? So someone shows up to camp.
Well, most of our campers who have not been to camp have not had boot work done. We encourage them to come the Friday or Saturday before camp. Monday through Friday is camp, and there are a number of reasons for that. We get to see them fitting in boots before we get them on snow, and and sometimes we even get to ski with them before camp. And if we don't, we see them in camp, and we can tweak it if we need tweaking, and any fine adjustments. But also the altitude here. If you come in on a Friday to one of our camps, you're going to be way ahead of time, way ahead of yourself for adjusting to the altitude on Monday when we get out there. Yep. And so that's how our camps are set up. And we have so many returning skiers. That's why it's so hard to get into camps, because the returning skiers keep repeating, and instructors and examiners from PSIA come to our camps to improve their skiing and get the latest knowledge about everything, about alignment, about their own skiing, about what's being taught and how to teach it. Um, and we have a great group of handpicked and trained of our own professionals,
Hmm.
coaches
Yeah,
that we've evolved over the last 25 years.
yeah, yeah. I
And you
mean,
were
just
one of them, and you were one of them for a while.
well, yeah, yeah. For up until 2008, and then the GFC kind of crushed us
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Canada. And also we all got sort of young families and moved on. But yeah, that was a wild time. So for the listeners, I ran camps in Canada and Australia from 2002 through to 2008, and I would move in pre-season and bunk in with Harold and Diana for 4 or 5 weeks at a time, and then we'd go and run our camps in Canada, and then I'd come back at the end of the season, um, and go from there. So, um, so if s- now, but you've also got an alignment shop. So if you can't make it to camp, is is booking into the shop the next best thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, we've evolved this thing to such a fine level now. We even manufacture parts for boots that can be inserted in the cuff so that we can adjust the cuff beyond what the manufacturers allow, because most boot companies don't have enough adjustment for 40 to 50% of the population. Needs more adjustment than the boots allow. So we have got the cuff adjustment thing down to a science, and we also have evolved the under boot shaving and plates to a really nice finish. I have a boot here, one of my previous boots with the plates are on them. I don't know if you can see that there are plates there. Yep, and then even on these, there's a, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a shim in there, even an extra one.
Oh, you put a little shimmy on top of that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
are they
that
your boots?
yeah, those are mine.
Yeah, you're
And you
always
can
tinkering.
fine tune that even on the hill. You can just
Yeah,
slide in a
right.
piece of credit
Yeah,
card strip, and people don't realize how little makes such a big change.
yeah. Marty and I talk about the fact that, like, the smallest amount, it's the difference between it feels pretty good to just the choir going, "Ah," and
Yeah.
just having it perfect. Because when
It's like
when
tuning your
yeah,
guitar and you hit that string just right and it just is in tune.
it's just it's just bang. And yeah, and so people are showing up to camp, they're gonna be taken through the alignment system and then the movement system as well, because sometimes there are some compensatory movements that need to be detuned, and then there are more efficient the primary movements teaching system, which is PMTS, to sort of ramp that up. Um, and yeah, you just lock it in. I mean, even with our business based in Canada, we had people that would just book year after year, and when I said I was winding up the business, there were grown people with tears in their eyes because like that's all they looked forward to every, you know, well, not all they looked forward to, but it was one of the main highlights of their year. Um, and so
Let me just
yeah,
interject one thing here, just as an example.
yeah,
I had a great relationship with Lito Tejada Flores, who
hmm,
you remember him.
yeah, yeah,
He wrote Breakthrough on Skis,
hmm,
and then he invited me to ski in one of his videos.
yeah,
Um, and that came about because Lito had his camps at Buttermilk in Aspen, and we had our alignment center there. And one day Lito had this one fellow in a group, and he was coaching that group, and that one guy was the worst, let's say the weakest skier in the group by a lot. He barely could keep up with the group going down the mountain. And he hadn't visited an alignment center yet. We just started up pretty much, and it was his first camp of the year. And he decided, well, what have I got to lose with this guy? I'm going to send him to the alignment center. So he drops the guy off, and Diana's there. She was running that one. And she checked him out and made the adjustments. And in an hour later, he was back out on the snow and joined Lito's group. And within 2 runs, he became the best skier in Lito's group. From the weakest skier to the best, he just leapfrogged ahead of everybody else in the group. And it was so obvious that every camp that Lito had in every group after that experience, he sent to the alignment center, whether they were skiing well or not. He just said, "This has got to be done," because the results were just amazing. And you know, when we evolved the protocols for where you put the knee over the boot and all of these different things based on what we saw on the mountain, not through guesswork or indoor measurements. It was all based on what we evolved as the skier skiing down the slope and how they moved.
Yeah, and, well, when we first like, the first year we went to Canada, we went to Kicking Horse probably a little bit early, it was their first year of operation, and there was, a local journalist there, and she'd written for years on, how terrible she was at skiing, right? And, we got wind of this, and we just invited her to have a look, and she was the she was more knock-kneed than I was, right? And back then we used to have shims, pre-shims, so we had 2, 3-degree shims,
So
and we
in the
just looked at
skis,
her.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
so
can
we'd
preset, yeah.
yeah, so we'd be pre-mounted. So we used to have, like, demo skis with 2, 3, 2, and 1, and we'd just throw those in and out. If we needed to go half, we just you could sight that, right? Um, and Scotty and I have looked at her, and, we're like so we just grabbed some temporary shims and just it was perfect snow conditions and stuff like that. And because 'cause she'd never been able to ski parallel in her life, and so we tipped her in a lot, like, a lot. Like, I remember we told you and you're like, "No, I don't wanna hear about it." But straight away, instantly, she was parallel skiing, and all the things that she thought she wasn't good enough to do, she could already do. It was just like and so there's these outliers where, like, your alignment really lets you down. So in my instance, I was initially 4.5 and 3. Now but I've retrained my body and I get better boots now and so I'm sort of quite close to aligned, just through
Well,
all
with
the
the
work.
cuff adjustments now also, that makes a big
Yeah,
difference. You can
that's right.
minimize what you need under the
Yeah,
boot because you can
yeah.
do more with the cuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm pretty close, because you grew up reasonably aligned as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I was close enough, to make it to the some World Cup races.
Yeah,
You don't go very far if you're way off.
like
Um,
if you were like 4.5 and 3 out,
no way,
no chance. Yeah,
no chance. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
and
I
so for
was
the
one, I was one off on my right and to the too far
like a
inside,
half,
and I was one off on my left, too far outside. But
right?
you can compensate as an athlete
Yeah,
for
and
that amount. And on a straight ski, it wasn't as crucial, especially if you had good balance. You could adjust
right,
with your hips and your counterbalance for that
yeah.
discrepancy.
And plus also snow conditions varies the alignment impact as well because I always found I was better in softer snow than on ice because on ice everything used to chatter and break away, whereas on softer snow like so I always said I was born to ski powder. So when I was at Whistler Blackcomb I loved it because I was skiing more aligned even though it was just a change in the snow conditions.
Well, one of the racers that I skied with a lot, he was a silver medalist in the World Championships, Werner Bleiner. When we were pro racing on the same Kneissel team, uh, I would, if I didn't make it all the way as far as he did, I would go up and help him out at the start. And we were at a race in, I think it was at Mount Snow. It was their ruts started developing, and he took out pieces of lanyard, which was leather straps that you used to wrap around your boots in case the binding opened. He used to cut pieces off about that long strips, and when the ruts got deeper, he used to step on them on the outside of each ski boot and the heel into the binding. So he tipped his legs in further, and it made a difference in his rut skiing by a lot because he was bow-legged to start with, and which is on ice you can get away with being a little bit more bow-legged. That knock-kneed is not nearly as good on ice as bow-legged. Bow-legged is stronger if you're a good athlete. So he was doing that just out of his own feeling, out of his own sense of what worked. So there were athletes already playing around with this stuff, but it hadn't been formalized. It hadn't been like systemized and really understood.
Yeah. And part of the problem with that too is because racing's such a competitive environment that if you've got this competitive edge in the US, say, you're not going to put your hand up to the Austrians and say, "Oh, by the way, we've figured this out," or no, it's not really set up that way. It's kind of like Formula One. They're trying to hide everything from everyone.
That's right. Yeah, they don't want to tell one boot company doesn't want to tell the other boot company what they're doing. And
Yeah.
same with skis, and same with coaching. It's
Yeah.
very secretive.
Yeah. And so, um, what's the best way for people to make a start with the Harb Ski Systems programs?
Right from the beginning, you mean, as a
Well, in
beginner?
terms of like, well, no, how to if someone wants to get in contact with you, find out more about the programs, where what's I mean, I know you've got YouTube, like where are some places they can start?
Oh, it's just Google Harold Harb or Harb Ski Systems,
Yeah.
and our you'll get to our website,
Yeah.
and our website is harbskisystems.com.
Yeah. I'll put the link into the description below.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's it's so easy to find. You just type in Harb or Harold Harb on Google, and you'll be linked up to YouTube videos. You'll be linked up to our website and pages on our website and
Yeah.
articles
Th-
maybe that I've done. Everything along those
There's a
lines.
there's a ton of information there to get you started down the I guess the path that you've created. Um, um, yeah, very generous with your information. I remember when your first book came out, I was working at Beaver Creek Ski School, and I'd have it inside my jacket, right? And so when I had spare time, I'd literally have the book out on the side of the hill, and I'd just be um, working on the stuff. Um,
And we
and
made those little cards inside that you could pull out. Remember
that's
it?
right.
And
What were
you
they
could
called?
carry.
Performance something or something. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I had that. Yeah, I had the card system as well. Um, and and then, I mean, the ski instructor manual is really good too. Like we had a guy who's a child heart surgeon who's top bloke and great skier, and he would improve. It's rare for clients to improve really well without you, if you know what I mean. Like, but he had that ability, and I'd be like, how are you doing this? And he goes, well, I just read the instructor manual at night and go out and try it the next day.
Yeah, we have skiers, instructors, and recreational skiers that, in fact, I'll send you some photos that you can put in with this podcast
Sure. Yeah.
of some of the skiers, the way they ski. We have one fellow, John, who skis at Yellowstone Club, and when I go up there to coach him and ski with him,
Hmm.
I've been coaching him
Yeah.
for 20 years now. He started
Yeah.
skiing when he was in his 40s.
Right.
And prior to that, he stopped skiing because he had a really bad ankle injury, broke his ankle, and it wasn't set properly. And it was all
Right.
crooked,
Right.
and had a hard time in ski boots. And now when I go up there, I run into his friends or people on the mountain,
Hmm.
and they say, "Oh, this is your instructor, John," and they tell me all the time that John's the best skier on the mountain.
Right.
He's the best
At
technical
Yellowstone.
skier at Yellowstone Club.
Yeah.
And
Right.
this is not one person who's told me this. Every time I go up there, I run into people that tell me that. And it's just astounding what you can do if everything is done right, right
Set
from the
up.
beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, exactly right. Now, just if you ever need a ski caddy when you're going to Yellowstone, I'm putting my I'll jump on it. No, I'm not inviting myself along. Although if there's ever an opportunity, I'm up for it. But we might almost leave it here. But I just had a thought in terms because we're sort of just going with some success stories now. How about Max Sherwood from Fernie?
Oh,
Like,
great guy. Yeah.
yeah, like so Max was the golf pro at
Yep.
Fernie, and and then I was going to his indoor golf thing at night. So I was coaching your system during the day, and then Max was hanging out like I'd hang out with Max at night, and I just wanted to talk about golf, and all he wanted to do was talk about skiing and what we were doing because he ran the BC, you know, race club and stuff like that. And Max was a phenomenal skier. And so then we hired Max to coach Marty and run race camps for us at the end of the season because we were still busy doing regular camps. Um, and then we started sending Max down to you to train. So, and here's someone who was arguably one of the best skiers on the hill. Um,
Absolutely. No, Max
and
was
then,
a very talented skier. Yeah.
yeah, but then the difference, well, I'll share the story because I like so we'd see him and he'd disappear off the camp and he'd train with you guys, and then he came up and it was like everyone was like, "Have you seen Max skiing now?" Right? And it's like because he just jumped absolute levels. And it was the funniest job interview with Max. Like we laughed about it because I took Max through the on snow stuff and with my, and we had a fleet of skis that were pre-shimmed and everything like that. I took him through that morning. That afternoon, after skiing, he's literally taking other instructors, setting them up on our equipment and taking them out and showing them what I taught him. And I'm like, and because he's the coolest guy and a phenomenal skier and such a great talent. But we're like, yeah, maybe we should hire this bloke because he's already doing like, so it didn't take him long to sort of get up to speed, but it was probably a development over a couple of seasons, and all of a sudden his skiing just jumped levels.
Yeah, I remember that when we first had him
Yeah,
working with us,
yeah,
he was. I recognized that he was very talented and
phenomenal.
gifted,
Yeah,
but hadn't evolved his technique to the every level that he could.
mhm.
And after he was working with us for a while, we did minor boot work. We didn't have to do a lot of his.
No, he's pretty close. Yeah,
Yeah, but he
'cause
just jumped leaps and bounds with the inside foot tipping first
mhm.
and
Yeah,
second, and then releasing with more of a flexing type
yeah,
release as
yeah,
opposed to an extension.
yeah,
And we want to summarize or finalize or follow finish up here, but
yeah,
at some point we can discuss some of the things that we were actually doing with our techniques,
yeah.
and we could touch upon what is really bothersome to me lately is all of the YouTube and internet stuff about ski technique.
Mhm,
There's so much information out there, and it's so much of it is convoluted, incorrect,
mhm.
and redundant, and really not very helpful to people. And I watch a lot of it,
Yeah,
and and maybe we could steer people away from what's not working and what
yeah.
does work a little
I
bit.
think we'll do some follow-ups, but yeah, I remember, uh 'cause, yeah, I'm like, "Max, everyone's telling you he's skiing so," because it was, he jumped levels, and to give you an idea, I guess I'm trying to demonstrate the value of Harold's system is Max had skied one level below World Cup. He was a phenomenal skier, and like he would ski with full gates and a drill, right? And I couldn't keep up with him before he went to your camp, right? And then he just, and even ski school director there, she's like, "Oh my god, what have you guys done to Max?" I'm like, "It's not me. He's training with Harold, right?" Um, and and then the other thing I used to have to manage with Max is like, my clients would think I was a skiing legend, and then Max had come down, and then they'd look at me like, "Oh, hang on, we thought you were the legend, right?" And it was the same for when you used to turn up to Fernie as well. We used to go and I'd call you on the radio and say, "Where are you?" Because my guys want to see you ski. And these guys have skied with me and thought I was a complete legend. And then they'd see you, and then they'd relook at me. And I'm like, "Yeah, I know that's Harold Harb. Like he wrote the book, right, boys? Like there's different levels to this." So look, yeah, it's been a great chat. It's been great to sort of get a sense of what where like what sort of shaped you to being what you are, because I mean you're pretty fearless online with your opinions, when it comes to skiing, and if people don't really know the backstory, do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you're like you're very confident in what you say online because you've done it at every level, right, across the board,
Well,
and so
I would never say anything I couldn't prove.
that's right.
What I say about skiing is what I've proven in skiing,
Hmm.
and and the others can't say that. And I'll follow up on some of that in another discussion
Yeah.
about how you train athletes and how at what age they come through and
Right.
how you train them,
Yeah.
and same goes for the public, and that's really important to know. as part of the learning process. But yeah, thanks. It's been great catching up, Peter, and seeing your knowledge about the system and what you've been
Yeah.
through. Yeah,
Well, yeah, yeah, because well, what worked for me was that I would get, I got all the good stuff from you, but then I was teaching it to my clients, and then that always elevates your own understanding of it because then you're watching them and getting the
right.
feedback, and then so I mean, if you the best way to improve is to understand a system that works and then go and teach it to other people and then
Yeah,
start to spot what's not working there and then you start to go actually maybe there's some of that in me and then it just sort of elevates your game. So you've been a huge impact in my skiing, that allowed me to win some pretty big races when I took up ski racing late in life. So thank you, Harold, for I guess just your pursuit of excellence in skiing across these 7 decades now. How?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
We can reminisce about some of that on our next talk.
yeah. So let's wind it up here. So thanks so much, and
Thank
I
you.
look forward to the next chat.
Great.